It's Thursday, December 15th, and we are reading The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land. And thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.
We'll take a temperature, but I really liked it. And I was telling my colleagues about it today. I had lunch with my book people. There really should have been a glossary, because I knew there's a lot of words and things that they referred to that maybe you looked up, or we can talk about today. But did you like the stories?
I liked some, but not all.
Okay.
I agree.
And I didn't finish it. I never finished the book, but I read many of them.
Okay.
And some I was disappointed that there wasn't more, that it didn't go on further.
Yeah.
She kind of stopped him abruptly, I thought, in certain instances.
I agree. There
Right.
was more, left you with wanting more.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a he.
I liked them all. I thought it was great. I thought, you
Yeah.
know, when he stopped, he was done, you know, and then you had to just figure out what maybe came next.
Right. So
Love
let's
the book.
yeah. I really loved it. Hi, Arlene.
Vanessa, I'm
Yeah.
wondering if, because there were so many stories, and I read this a while ago, if
Mhm.
before we discuss each one, just literally a sentence summary, because that'll help me remember.
Absolutely.
And I did write a few Post-its, but that would be helpful if we could do that.
As always, I like to discuss the author.
Mhm.
And you see, Omer Friedlander, he's young. That's him.
He's kind of young.
Yeah, he's
Very
young. He's handsome. And he has a great website. And I'll put this link in the chat. He was preoccupied with figuring out why he wrote the story of collection in English. And that's his second language, rather than Hebrew, my mother tongue. Hebrew is a fascinating language because it was used for prayer and ritual for 2,000 years, a holy language. And the gap between biblical Hebrew and its modern day equivalent is probably not as large as Chaucer's English and today's English. So, he continues here. My decision to write in English, whether conscious or not, has to do with me feeling like both an insider and an outsider in Israel. I've never felt like I truly belonged in Israel, even though I was born in Jerusalem and grew up in Tel Aviv. And yet, even though I feel like a stranger sometimes, it is still my home. The place where the people's way of laughing and being friends and getting into arguments is most familiar to me. Writing in English allows me a certain distance that is necessary in order to be more probing and ironic, to see all strangeness and particularity of place with its many contradictions and complexities. One of my colleagues told me that she didn't read it at her synagogue because it was too lefty. And it wasn't lefty, but it was a little critical of, it was critical of Israel.
Mhm.
So, and the other thing is, he is a twin.
What was that?
Interesting.
And I think that theme surfaces in Walking Shiva, or, some of them, they were brothers and not twins. So I think that part of his identity is, both very strong, and we can see those themes in his writing.
The first story is lefty, though.
Oh, Jaffa Oranges.
Yeah.
All right. So, all right. So Sandy, why do you say it's lefty?
Well, even being
Oh, wait.
critical-
I told Leanne I'd read a sentence. So in Jaffa Oranges, the narrator meets the young woman, and he can't confess his crime to the Arab who, did he kill him? Anyway, the granddaughter, even though part of him desperately wants to. So, she came back and she saw all the orange fields, which they had owned in partnership, and then he had to flee. All right, Sandy, take it away.
just the fact that it's definitely critical of Israel and the war for independence, how
Mhm.
things changed, people who were together and believed in each other, their friendship, how things could turn. And I think it's very critical of that period, which we've never been told that story. Even
Right,
I've never been told that story, and I know a lot about Israel.
right.
And I owned orchards there, and I remember going out to the fields with David, and we found Arabs stealing oranges in our orchards, Pardesim. And you can be angry, but they still feel that's theirs.
Yeah. I think another book, which I don't know if I read for book group, it's called Lemon Tree. And it kind of has the same thing where, and it wasn't a movie, but it was like a podcast or maybe a TV show. And, that these Palestinians came back to their home in Jerusalem, and this was their lemon tree, and the conversation between the Jewish and the Palestinian family. And I think that, Sandy, I don't know if I agree with you that it's lefty. I think that it showed what's happening in contemporary Israel. And I readily admit that I'm a boomer. Well, I have to. I'm 63. It's my age. And I grew up with a very romantic feel for Israel. I remember the 6-Day War. I remember the Yom Kippur War. I remember Entebbe. And our kids today, all they remember is what they see on television. And it's Israel is not the underdog. And Israel is, I think we get terrible press that, we're the aggressors. So I thought it was fairly even-handed. Paula.
Not knowing much about Israeli history as as an American Jew,
Mm-hmm.
I often see criticism of Israel in the way that I think about being a mother. You may be disappointed in your children. It doesn't mean you don't love them.
Right.
And so to express criticism objectively, it doesn't offend me for the novelist to do that. So I see it kind of from both sides of the line. That we just don't understand what it feels like living in a country where we're not attacked on all sides and people want to destroy us.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought there. I think that, it's hard to look at any of this with,
Tell about Dariat scene.
about what?
How they pull the people out.
David's talking about Dear Yatsin. Nobody here wants to talk about that.
That's all right.
Right.
No
Listen.
wonder, like they. What are you doing?
He's angry because I'm trying to shut him up.
No one wants to talk, David, no one wants to talk about Dear Yassin. I'll talk about that in a minute. Sabra and Shatila. I mean, there are things that the Israeli army has done that are horrible. Dear Yassin, they went in and, slaughtered an Arab village. And when the victors write the history books, so they kind of write over that. They don't, can you find out about Dear Yassin? Yes, but you kind of have to know about it to Google it and find out about it. Sabra and Shatila were, I see Roberta in one hot minute. Sabra and Shatila were refugee camps up in Lebanon. Again, terrible massacres by Arik Sharon. And it's not something, well, it's certainly not something we teach the kids, but it is, something that we should know about. Roberta.
Yeah, well, the last book we read, I think it was the last one, about the two women that were both sick who become friends. And the Jewish woman living on the kibbutz is living in the home of the Palestinian woman.
Right.
Haviva Ner David Hope.
Right. Yeah. And so we kind of looked at that. And I think I don't know enough about how Israeli history is taught, but it's kind of like the dilemma, here in the United States about slavery or anything that is not complementary to American history. Now, I firmly believe that people need to know what the facts are and then decide on their own or discuss things, so I agree. I think it was Paula who said, if someone is critical, like Americans are very comfortable being critical of America, and even the piece that the author of this book wrote, he makes reference to the fact that Israelis argue, so it's just the way people kind of learn from one another, I think.
I think that if you were to study, and Sandy, I see your hand, 1 minute here.
Well,
I
I
think if
just
you were
wanted
to-
to talk about Sabra and Shatila, but go ahead.
Okay, I think that if, and of course, they call the Civil War the war between the states in the South.
In the South.
And I would imagine that, deep in the South, deep in the heart of Dixie, you would get a different education on the Civil War than hopefully than you would get in the Chicago public schools. Unfortunately, in the United States, all publishers, textbook publishers, are beholden to the state of Texas because they order the most books, and so whatever Texas wants, Texas gets. And I would imagine in Israel, again, it would be in the Haredi, the ultra Orthodox schools, they're teaching that Hebron, that's all our land, and it's mentioned in the Bible. So you have that push and pull. And certainly as educated Americans and educated Reformed Jews, it's upon us. Thank you, Sharon. I put stuff in the chat, and we should know about this. Sandy, go ahead.
Sabra and Shatila, I lived there. I lived about an hour and a half from there. Our daughter was in the Air Force at that time. Arik, years later, when I had returned here, I went to the Highland Park Library because Arik Sharon's son was there giving a talk one night about the book that he wrote, and he mentions his father as a hero. And when I questioned him about Sabra and Shatila, he denied the whole thing. But the true story is Israelis did not go in and kill those 5,000 old people and children in Sabra and Shatila. They planned it. They stayed outside. They put floodlights on so that everything could be seen. And then the Christian phalange came from the Lebanese border, and they went in there and did the killing. And so it's easy for some Israelis that don't want to feel that they killed the people at Sabra. They deny the whole thing.
Right. Are you surprised? Arik Sharon was blamed for all of this. Are you surprised that his son denied it? Sandy?
It was just sad hearing it in Highland Park.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to make a big deal. I said what I
Right.
said. I questioned him about it, and then I let it go. But people lie. And also another thing about Israel that I don't think people really know. If you go to Haifa, Netanya, Tel Aviv, Ashkelon, Beersheba, people think one way, and they're really good people. And then if you go to Jerusalem and the settlements in the West Bank, it's totally different politics.
Yeah.
And they have different kinds of textbooks even.
I'm sure they do. I am sure they do. Just like I'm sure we have different textbooks here in the United States. Merle, and I unmuted you.
Okay. Reading this story, I kept remembering an experience I had where my biology teacher invited me and another girl who was in our biology class to visit her orchard in Michigan. And her sons were there. We were all teenagers. And she said, let's go out to the orchard. We're going to thin peaches. And she said that we would pick the smallest peaches off so that the other peaches could grow bigger. And it was this nurturing experience with the trees. And I walked away thinking how these people in the story burnt an orchard, something living, something beautiful, something that had been nurtured. And I kept thinking, this is so different from burning some other inanimate thing that's not growing. But I felt like it was a very cruel thing to do, and it destroyed the friendship between these two boys, men. Now they were men. One was a soldier, and that as a soldier, he was forced to make this moral dilemma. He just had to do his job, even though it was going to destroy his friend's orchard. So it was a very moving story, very.
I agree. And if we think back to Rebel Daughter, I always wondered why, the Zealots, they didn't have enough food. And they burnt their food. And there's just something when, people are in war, whether it's in Ukraine or Israel, and, they torch this so the other side can't get it, but everyone's hungry. And, it's certainly during Rebel Daughter or any of these times, it's not like you can go to a store and get something. I mean, it really, and I think in the Ukraine, it has disrupted the food chain and, getting out grain and all of that. So it's so hard to fathom that somebody would be so hell-bent, like they're crazy with the cause. They're absolutely crazy with the cause. I'm Andy.
I thought it fairly profound that the old man, actually, I think he made the right decision in not telling his former friend's granddaughter that he burned down the orchard.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That it sort of kept a legend alive, kept sort of some simpatico alive, and in the long run would foster better Israeli-Palestinian relations.
Yeah.
He was probably feeling very guilty, don't you think, all those years knowing what he did?
Was. You could even in his
Absolutely.
narration,
Yeah,
he
a
was
lot of
guilty.
guilt. Yeah.
But
Oh,
I thought about it and I thought, do we die with our secrets to protect ourselves or others? Because was in terms of the motivation there, I don't disagree with you in terms of what he ultimately decided, but that, I just started thinking about that. Like, who is he protecting? And I don't know. What was his motivation?
Whenever we say secrets, I think of Roberta, because we've discussed so many of our books have people keeping secrets and secrets. And although I do agree in this case that I usually say there shouldn't be secrets, but this is a case where I go the other way. Roberta, what do you think?
I mean, I just think it's a conflict. And if you've ever heard this experience, you're only as sick as your strongest secret or something. There's secrets in families that just kind of create all kinds of things for decades or generations. But it makes, I mean, it's a human trait. I'm not saying that it's that it's so bad. It's just we make decisions sometimes. And then I think with secrets, sometimes people don't even know the secret anymore. They just know it's a secret.
Yeah, absolutely. The conversos, they were practicing Jewish rituals in secret, and they never told anyone. And then 100 years later, they don't know why they're lighting 2 candles in the closet on Friday night. And we read a couple books about that. I'll have to go look them up because we should read them again, because it's just fascinating. That is, a secret that permeated hundreds of years.
Remember how upset in the last book the wife was that the husband knew that the house that they had purchased, he knew the history of it, and he'd never told her.
Yeah.
That
was a bad secret. That was a bad secret.
Do you think that when people tell their secrets to get the guilt off of their chest as kind of being a selfish act for your own well-being, to get that secret out there and to get rid of your guilt? Sometimes, I mean, it's a really stretch to say the word selfish, but you are doing something to help yourself.
Yeah.
It depends on the secret. I'm sure many of us have had the conversation with our spouse. Should you stray just once, and it was a one-night stand, and it was on a business trip in Tahiti, and you would never find out about it, would you want to hear about it? And
I was thinking when Marilyn said that, I was thinking of that scenario because, you know, I'm sure it happens. And occasionally my best girlfriend and I will hear about, because, you know, in the Jewish world, unfortunately, just like in anywhere, you know, this, I said, well, this story starts out, you know, the rabbi, you know, had an affair with the cantor. The cantor was a woman. I mean, you don't even know where it's going to go. But, and like, we're always surprised, like, what, how, but is it selfish? Like Marilyn said, when, you know, you want to get that off your chest, or maybe you should keep it to yourself. I don't know. Merle.
Well, at the beginning of the story, they mention a poem called Eyes. And somewhere after that, he says, I'm in the worry business. And then you wonder, what's he worrying about? He has grown children, and this girl is meeting him, and they're going to tell happy stories about the friend. And then you find out why he's in the worry business. It's probably something he's been carrying his whole life since it happened.
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between, you know, that type of, also the Golden Hotel, all of
Right.
those things, like she had the affair with the pickle man, and then she finds out the kid has a rash, like her husband had a rash. So what, you know, that type of stuff, it, you know, that's, I don't know, that would be so hard to keep in. My middle son is very concrete, and he, you know, lying, when he was growing up, you know, lying was a thing, and we tried to tell him what a white lie was. And to this day, and he's 30, he'll say, you know, a white lie is like, you should always tell the bride she's pretty. Yes. You know, like he had to have some. Now, I will tell you, he's lied to us about certain things, and you know, that's a different story. But, you know, that whole thing of what's a white lie, it took us a long time to settle on what's a white lie. In the title story, The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land, it's about Simcha, a man rich in imagination, but poor in actual resources. Simcha means happy, or a simcha is a happy event. And it's a very common name. And our Hebrew tutor at Macomb, her name is Simcha. It can be either a man or a woman. How does Simcha's imagination enrich his and his young daughter Lali's life? How does it hinder him? And does it hold them both back? I thought the whole thing of the air from the Holy Land was also indicative of the tourist industry in Israel. That's a huge, huge industry that keeps Israel afloat. And I do think there would be people who would buy air. You know, maybe I'm exaggerating, or, you know, saying that the tourists are not that smart. Paula?
We had half of our population vote for Trump. He's Simcha. It's a house of cards.
Yeah.
It's illusion,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So he was capitalizing on the industry.
Yeah.
But I think he was a very sad, unhappy character.
All right, Marilyn, and then we'll get back to if he was sad.
Okay, when you're talking about souvenirs from Israel and whatever, the first time I went to Israel back in 2010, we were able to go to the Dead Sea and wallow in the mud and go into the Dead Sea. When I went back in 2017 with some friends of mine, I was thinking we're going to go back to the same place, but it wasn't there anymore. But you could buy mud from the Dead Sea. I'll never forget this, for 20 shekels. And I said, I am not buying mud from the Dead Sea when 7 years ago, I was actually in it, and that's something else. It's a great gimmick to sell people the mud from the Dead Sea.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is. I mean, the Dead Sea is shrinking, and that is, another environment. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
our environment's impact on Israel and water and how scarce it is there. Do you think that? How does Simcha's imagination, how does it hinder him? Oh, who said that he was very unhappy? Right, Paula. I think he lived in a fantasy world. I don't think he was all there.
No, but I think he realized that his imagination and the schemes and the dreams were not substantive enough to support himself. And, where am I going to live? How long are we going to be imaginary dolphins? I mean, everything was,
Yeah. And his daughter was young.
She was 6 or 7. He kept talking about mitzvah.
Right.
And it was 6 or 7 years away.
Right. And she seemed to have more
sense
and had her feet in the real world, and he did not. And she was trying to protect him.
Correct.
And I thought that was sad. Leanne.
I thought, though, his creativity to please his daughter.
Yeah.
I thought that was special. It reminded me of the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, when Will Smith takes his little son into the bathroom, or they're hiding from the dinosaurs. And he was, am I right? Will Smith? Yeah, he was in that movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of that. It was like, it was the only thing that he could think of. And he felt he really reached her with that. And that was their unique relationship. So you're right. It was fantasy for him, but I think.
For the first time, Simcha wondered if, when they sold bottles of air to tourists, she had been the one humoring him rather than the other way around. Friedlander writes, what do you think of the dynamic between this father and daughter? And what about her mother, Simcha's wife? Thoughts on that, and then I'll read what he said.
I read it so long ago.
I know. I'm Andy.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it was healthy, sometimes it was unhealthy. When he took the daughter to a dolphinarium and they saw imaginary dolphins, I found that endearing. When he took her to a restaurant, which he could not pay for, that
it was heartbreaking.
Put her at risk, and
She
was
paid for it, didn't she?
unhealthy. She paid for it.
Yeah.
And to teach a child cheating behavior.
Right.
And as far as the totality of it, the wife or ex-wife probably saw that he's to some extent using the little girl to sell this air and to sort of promote this cheating idea.
I mean, I would imagine the wife believes that he cannot take care of the little girl, and that he shouldn't have any custody because he can't feed himself, never mind, or take care of himself, never mind take care of a child.
And he was very
She's
worried
been
about
married to
that.
him. She, as an adult, has been married to this other person who seems to have a hard time being an adult. But that doesn't mean he has a hard time loving his daughter. I believe he really loved his daughter.
Yeah,
But the kind of adult role model is frightening, because and here's a little girl who's taking care of her dad, and that's not so healthy. But what I loved about these stories is they're very complicated. They're all about, our own humanity and the shtick that we have, or the, the ways we rationalize things. And Merle, I just have to say to you, I've been wanting to say this to you for months. I love it when you make comments, because you find things in these books that you celebrate and share with us. And I mean, all the comments are great, but there's something about the things that you notice that I wish I noticed. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
I agree. I love everybody's comments. I think that I hope that we enrich one another because we all see something different in a story. The
Absolutely.
end of what Friedlander said about the Simcha, did you see any reversal in the roles in the story? Yes. Does the child become something of a parent by the end, or does the imagination prevail?
No, I think the child becomes the parent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, his imagination went bye-bye.
Well, it was still there, but
It wasn't,
It
it
doesn't,
wasn't, it wasn't strong. It wasn't as strong as it was earlier in the book. His way of thinking, I think, diminished a little bit because he realized that he really couldn't provide for his daughter. And that really bothered him a lot.
The the story, The Checkpoint. And that was where the mother would go and she's trying to help the Palestinians. Another reason why I think they would call this book lefty. And but her son had died, and it's very slowly revealed, you know, that she kind of had an argument with him before the last time she saw him, and it was friendly fire. It was really heartbreaking. In Checkpoint, the narrator wonders about the future of children on both sides of the long-term civil conflict. I wonder how long it will take for him to harden, become bitter and angry. How many more humiliating days spent waiting at the checkpoint until he begins resisting with a group of other boys from his village, throwing rocks at passing settler vehicles, and confronting soldiers with riot gear and tear gas canisters and rubber bullets until he's hauled off to prison for throwing one stone too many, she says of a Palestinian boy. I mean, it's very poignant.
It's probably very true too, of course. We know that.
that
And
was,
who lived in the occupied territory, though, he scared the hell out of me when he attacks her.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I
That
thought
was a Haredi guy.
oh my God, that's really was frightening to me. And
Yeah.
she sensed it. She knew he was following her.
Yes.
They had words,
Yes.
but I'm always shocked that when human beings act on the ugly feelings that they have. You know, I know they go through people's minds, but this guy was so upset with her that if he hadn't been stopped, who knows what he would have done to her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sharon, did you want to say something?
Well, she not only lost her son, but she kind of lost her husband through this because he stopped talking, or, you know, so I think it just showed the impact of, you know, how this affects family relationships. And the other thing was what a strong woman she was, that, you know, this didn't, I think some people, if this had happened, you know, I was punished or whatever, but she keeps going back to the checkpoint and doing what she believed in, even though, you know, her son was killed over it. So I thought this was one of the best stories. You know, it had so much.
It had a lot. And I think that in Israel, because it's 3 million Jews, there's probably now 2 million Arabs, Palestinians. Everyone knows somebody who died in a war. Everyone. And, you know, when people make Aliyah, I've seen in writings, they'll say that they feel like outsiders because they don't know anyone who died. It's just a matter of time, unfortunately, because and not that many Israelis die compared to Palestinians, but the Jewish world is so small. So the other thing this mother said of an Israeli boy, how long until he becomes resentful, inflamed, driving down the highway, his car pelted by stones thrown by Palestinian boys from the side of the road? How long until the child picks up a gun himself and, vowing revenge, takes the law into his own hands? how do you feel about the way the story depicts the conflict? I mean,
You
I
know,
think.
Again, as an outsider, you think about people who make Aliyah and they go to Israel and you think, gee, that sounds just like a beautiful life to go back to a homeland. It's a tough life.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's harsh. And
Yeah.
this depicts all that. It's painful.
Yeah.
So, again, as Americans, it's hard to imagine a life like this.
Right. And it says here, how does Friedlander show us the experiences of people on both sides?
Very well, I think. Yeah.
I agree. And
Yeah.
that's why I think some people might not like it, because it does portray both sides. And I think that certainly working with adults in a Reformed congregation, it is, what's the word? I can't think of it, but it's my responsibility to present literature like this and not present one-sided literature. And, you can make your own, not decisions, but you can make your own mind up about this. So another story, which was funny, not funny, was the Sephardi survivor.
Oh.
And they kidnapped the man, and then they want to take him to school because there's another kid there who always gets the survivor prize because he brings his
That's
grandfather.
That was so clever.
It was very clever. And again, it's pointing out that the Sephardi community and the Ashkenazi community are very different. And I think that as the generations go on and there's more and more intermarriage, there's not as much of a difference. But
The beauty queen had that.
right, that's what I was trying to think of. The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem shows the whole Ashkenazi Sephardi conflict. The two brothers attempt to kidnap an old man in order to pretend they were related to the Shoah. What is the story saying about the ways we somewhat counterintuitively sometimes wish to be more intimately connected to tragedy and trauma?
I just want to say one thing about Sephardi.
Yeah.
I happen to be a quarter. My mother's father was Persian.
Yeah.
When it was Persia. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I don't even like to think of it, Iran, as
my
heritage, but I think of Persia. So, and my grandmother was from Russia. So there was the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic in the same home. And that was very interesting because we would have my grandmother's family come over and we'd have my grandfather's Persian relatives come over, and it was two completely different ways of doing things. But it was a wonderful way to grow up, to have both communities on the same home, made at different times. But I had a good grasp of my grandfather's Persian family plus my grandmother's Ashkenazi family. That's just a little tidbit I'm throwing out there.
Yeah. Leanne, and then
she's from a mixed marriage, that's called.
Yeah, absolutely. Leanne and then Andy.
Oh, Andy, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I have a friend whose mother is Ashkenazi and her father was Sephardic. And her grandmother, who was Sephardic on the father's side, when the mother would ask, who she's Ashkenazi, ask them for the holidays, the Sephardic mother-in-law would say, "Oh, thank you so much. We'll come if we don't get a better offer."
Oh. My relatives weren't like that.
Now that could be just personality, but
yeah,
she looked down on her Sephardic daughter-in-law.
Interesting.
Well, I think Ashkenazis looked down on Sephardics for many, many years.
I know.
Except though, at when the state of Israel, like the first Aliyah, when Eliezer ben Yehuda, who rejuvenated the Hebrew language, he was Sephardi. And that's when the Sephardi, not unlike when Emma Lazarus was in New York, they were from a,
You have the phone?
they were, they were from a much higher class. And then it flip-flopped. So there was a time when the Sephardi were, they were cultured and had the money. It's always with the money.
High class, Vanessa. They were
High
considered
class.
high class, and they looked down on the Ashkenazi Jew. They really
And-
did.
Right. And, again, we can look at America, the Germans came, they looked down on the Russians. And I'm talking about, at the turn of the century. And then we can look in our lifetime. We've had a lot of Russians come here. And sometimes the interaction between our Americans and Russians have been very strained. And hopefully, again, in the next generations, I hope that the Russians stay Jewish and they intermarry with our people, and that we'll have a stronger Jewish community. Okay, the story of the Alta Saken, replaying the voice, they were collecting the junk, and they kept
Right.
replaying their father's voice on a cassette to the mother. And also the mother in checkpoint repeatedly washing her late son's military uniform. There was a lot of repetition. I thought the boys playing their father's voice was, again, sad and poignant.
Wasn't this
And-
the younger son who was doing that though?
Yeah, and then the older son got mad and
Yeah,
ripped it up.
right.
And we can all remember how easy that was to do, to rip a cassette tape.
Mhm.
Now, you can't, a recording is a recording. I guess you could erase it, but it would be much harder to destroy it and physically destroy it like that. And I just thought that was, all of these little things that he writes about are very descriptive, and it really makes you think about it and tie in with the family. Do you think that, where do you think the line falls for them between healthy repetition and perhaps less healthy fixation? Do you think it's possible to truly move on from losing a parent or a child? That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
I think it all depends on the person, how you feel. I mean, my parents have been gone since the late 1980s, and I think about them all the time, but I'm not sitting and mourning them. But
Mhm.
when Rhonda's in-laws were killed in that accident, to this day, I cannot get over that. I cannot get over that.
I don't
And I
go
get
by
very,
that
I get very
spot.
emotional when I
Yeah.
I
think
don't go
about
by
them.
that spot and not think about them.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because it was, it was in 2012, okay?
Right.
the
And
way
just
he
to
died-
quickly bring everybody up, they were in a car and a railroad train bridge collapsed on their car.
No, the bridge did not collapse.
No,
The coal
the
car.
railroad cars.
coal-
And
car, right.
the coal car fell on their car, and the car was buried under all this coal, and it happened on July 4th. And the next day, the workers came to clean up the mess, not even thinking in their wildest dreams that there was a car underneath it. And they see the bumper with a license plate.
Yeah.
And
It was very sudden and a tragedy.
it was
Paula.
horrible, horrible.
Sure.
Marilyn, our car was behind theirs. We were about 20 minutes behind, and we were going to the same place that they were going to.
Yeah, they were going to the Glen to
The
movie
movies.
theater.
Yeah.
Right. And we were just 20 minutes behind them. We
Wow.
got stuck there in traffic, and then we learned that there had been an accident. We had no idea how tragic it was. But we thought, thank God, and that it didn't fall on our car. And we go that way all the time because we live in Northbrook and my daughter lives in Glenview. We go past there so
Yeah.
many times a week. And I never go under that bridge that David or I don't say something. We remember them.
Well, I'll tell you, the fact that there was nobody else in the car besides Bert and Zoreen, because she sometimes would take our grandchildren. Sometimes she would go with her sisters. And I was in a movie theater with Rob and Rhonda, and he gets a message on his phone. Oh, there was a train derailment in Northbrook. And of course, we did not know that it was his parents. So I still have a lot of trouble with that to this day.
Yeah.
Well,
Paula.
I was going to say that in life, there are some tragedies that we expect to befall us at some point in our life, like the death of parents. The death of a child, the death of a spouse. I mean, nobody's ever prepared for that.
No.
And I think the sheer horror of what happened to them makes it so raw that how do you really get past that? It's really something you couldn't even think about or imagine. So it's not surprising that you still feel that kind of.
Yeah, I really do. And I have a picture on the coffee table in my living room from my grandson Zach's bar mitzvah, which was a month before they were killed. And all of us are standing there at the bima. This is before the day before the service, whatever, and the whole family is there. And I just look at the two of them and I can cry. It's just so heartbreaking.
So raw. It's still raw.
Yeah. Going back to the Sephardi survivor, do you understand the boy's impulse, however misguided it may have been, to try to link themselves to this tragedy? Paula, then Andy.
I don't know if they were trying to link themselves to the tragedy or being typical kids who wanted to do better than someone else.
Okay.
I don't know that because they're kids. And if this other kid always had the award every year, they wanted to come up with something on their own that could top that kid.
Leanne.
I don't know if I'm naive. I found that whole situation discussing the Holocaust and that they would have this presentation at school and somebody's going to one up somebody each year with the most tragic story. I found it very unbelievable, very upsetting. I mean, think about how, we listen to survivors' stories and get, do all the reading we can do. And it made so light of the whole Holocaust. I was very disturbed by it.
It's very, I think that in the States, and I mean, even being in the business of, getting survivors and speakers, I could appreciate the Black humor. It was Black humor. I have Sharon and then Andy and then Paula.
Yeah, I think Andy was supposed to. I mean, we had Queen for a Day and we still have
Oh,
talk shows where they find the saddest stories and parade them. And it wasn't, it's not one event, the Holocaust, but there's something about that talking or, having the best sad story that people will listen to.
I agree.
Yes, yeah.
I agree. Andy and then Paula.
I'm okay.
No, sorry. Okay. Paula.
Sharon brought up Queen for a Day. That's what I was going to talk about.
Yeah, you'd get a refrigerator if you.
I used to think that was
who had the
horrible,
worst,
though.
saddest story. I remember that. You put on a crown and a cape and you get a refrigerator.
Yeah,
That's
but I just
exactly-
always felt like they were it just was sad that they were
It's very exploitive.
people.
was-
Yeah.
Yeah, very exploitive.
When I was a little girl, I lived in California in Burbank. And I guess the show was done at a studio nearby. We had a neighbor whose son was deaf, and he went to a special school. And twice my mother went with this neighbor. I don't know that they ever won, but they were trying to they wanted a prize for the school. So it was this whole story about their son. But I used to watch that show even as a kid and think it was a little sick and
It was
crazy.
very, very strange.
I did too.
I have never heard of it. So I just Googled it and
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
it's-
yeah.
Was in the
That's
50s.
very-
Ever watched it? Oh, well, we watched it.
Oh, we
There,
watched
there
it.
weren't that many shows on television in those days either.
yeah,
That were worth watching.
yeah, that must be it.
Yeah.
How did these stories change or augment your understanding of what it's like to live at the center of conflict? How does Friedlander show us the experience of people on both sides? To what degree do you think this collection overall is political?
Hmm. Good question, Vanessa.
A lot of
Making
work.
us think.
Andy,
I'm not sure I would label it as political, but more factual. You know, sharing
Okay.
experiences from another point of view. And because of those experiences and the divide, politics comes out of it. But I don't think the book itself is political. I thought like the book, by contrast, Lemon Tree would be more, I would call that more political, because they talk more about the leaders
yeah,
and
interesting.
leaders organized
Yeah.
this and sanctioned that. This was more like vignettes of everyday life,
Interesting.
Expose of
like an expose, Roberta.
Marilyn,
I think that most American Jews, or maybe I should take out the word most, I think a lot of American Jews don't realize the Palestinian story and how they were treated from the very beginning. You know, in 1948, when Israel became a state and they had lived in that land all those years and all that whole thing, that whole scenario, okay? And I just don't think a lot of American Jews, or maybe Jews all over the world, really think about what the Palestinian people went through and are still going through today and are sympathetic to them.
I will tell you this, your children and grandchildren know more. Sandy.
Yeah, I think you're right, Vanessa. Yeah.
You know, when I lived in Israel, and I lived 7 minutes from the West Bank and had interactions with a lot of Palestinians, I was very sympathetic. But if you take the whole picture, the total picture, look at about 75 years of history, they've had very bad leadership, just like the bad leadership they have now in Israel, in the both sides, I think. But when they could have made peace with Israel, when they could have shared the land, they didn't. They didn't. They had many opportunities. And instead, many of them are living in what they call refugee camps. What Jews would stay in a piece of land and want to live in a refugee camp for 70 years? The Jews that suffered in the Holocaust, they got on with their lives. They got whatever they could and they went on, and they tried to make life better for their children. And yet so many Palestinians are living in these camps and in squalor and having 9 and 10 kids. So, I mean, I really see both sides of it. I know many Palestinians that I admire and that I like there, but there are so many that are living in the past, and they're just teaching hate in their schools.
Yeah, it's not an easy conflict, and in any history of a country, you have to dive down deep. In his acknowledgments, Friedlander cites the words of Israeli writer and peace activist David Grossman, whose son died in the war. Every one of us has a kind of official story that we present to others, to strangers we meet, or even to people we know. But if we are lucky enough to find a good listener, a sympathetic witness, then they will make us tell not only our official story, but the story underneath it. Friedlander adds that his wish for this collection was to unearth the hidden stories of individuals beneath the fossilized official narrative. So I think that he achieved that. I think these stories made us think and were very poignant. And so this was in Israel, and our next book, and I bet you a lot of you have read this book. This has been a favorite book of mine for a long time, and I'm going to reread it. And I encourage you to, The Red Tent by Anita Diamond. And if you haven't read it, you're in for a treat.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And I will send this out tomorrow. But now we should probably take a quick look at so this is December.
Thank you for selecting this book for tonight, though.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, that's going to be a good read.
Yeah, let's see. How about can we do January 26th?
Sure.
Great. Put that down.
That's the day I go to my eye doctor to see if he wants to do my other cataract surgery, but I'll be
Well, you
okay
can-
by that evening.
You
Yeah.
you can give us a report.
Right.
We'll see
Okay,
if you can see us. We'll hold up to our fingers.
okay.
It's good seeing everyone. A couple, just as long as I have you all. Saturday night is latkes and vodka, or vodka and latkes. It's going to be a fun social event. And Sunday, adult enrichment, which is virtual, is, as I like to say, our own. Our congregate Ben Zeller talking about how has the commercialization of the December holidays affected our experiences. And he is a super interesting guy. He's done a couple lectures for us, and I always learn from him. And I know I'm doing it was my idea. But anyway, he's going to be interesting, 10 o'clock on Sunday.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
happy Hanukkah, everybody.
That's right. Happy Hanukkah.
Yes. Light
Thanks
your
for all the good
menorah.
comments, Scott. I love listening to everybody, and I love reading these books.
Thank you.
So smart.
Well, I'm really hoping I'm not disappointed by the Red Tent, because I have held it, like Little Women, in my heart. And I probably read it 20 years ago. So we're going to have to see.
I've never read it, so I'm really looking forward to it. I'm
Well,
sorry, I've
listen.
never read it.
Wait, Gail, I
I
can't
I
hear
went
you.
to Israel on my first Israeli trip, and I finished it on the plane before I landed, but I started it before I ever left. So it'll be interesting, having gone to Israel several times, to now reread it. And
Exactly.
I just
Exactly.
loved it. It
Yeah,
was a
I loved it
fabulous
too.
read.
So we'll see if we still love it.
Okay.
So
Thank
Chag Sameach. It's good to see everyone. Arlene, we love having you here. You were silent. Wait, I'm going to unmute you. Any last words, Arlene?
I am so impressed with the intellect in this group. I don't know anybody except you, Vanessa, and I'm just blown away by the depth of all the women in this group. I've been in other book groups, but I've never seen people share so much about their own personal life as well as relating to the stories. So it makes everything richer. So I was just listening because I was a little intimidated, actually, because
Right. Well, that's why I unmuted you. Don't be intimidated. I want everyone to speak up. And I feel really good that Sharon spoke twice today. So not that I'm keeping score on anyone, but it's just good to have such a rich dialogue. And I thank all of you. So have a great month. We'll see you in January. Keep warm. Hag Sameach. Happy New Year.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Vanessa, for
Bye,
doing
everyone.
this.
Thank you.
Hugs from me.
Vanessa.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you.